It's a great pleasure to welcome Ellie Southwood, who is chair of the RNIB, as our next speaker, and she is going to be talking to us all, celebrating 150 years of the RNIB. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of your conference. It's a real pleasure, and not least because it's an opportunity to get out of the wind. I feel somewhat windswept, so if there are any photographs, you must forgive the state of my hair, but it is quite extraordinary out there. It's lovely to be part of today, and actually, sort of when I was preparing and thinking about what to say, it sort of prompted me to have a conversation with my parents about what their experience had been like with both me. So I was born with Leber's congenital amaurosis, which, like every condition, affects everybody differently, but for me that means I've got no useful sight at all. My sister, who's 2 years younger, is also blind. So it prompted some really interesting conversations about what their experiences had been like, and also what the future might be like. So my sister's also just had a baby, so it all sort of came together such that we were talking about genetics and how little actually we understood about it. It's funny, neither Matilda nor I have ever really looked into it, and on one level, doesn't that sound really strange? I'm almost 40 and never really looked into it at all, just sort of got on with it. I became chair of RNIB 18 months ago. It's been an extraordinary time. I think one of the fantastic things about RNIB is having 150 years of amazing heritage. One of the really difficult things about RNIB is having 150 years of heritage. And I think sometimes, that does make us somewhat institutional, a little old-fashioned, perhaps, a little a little slow to change. So one of my main focuses has been on, looking back at what we've done, but looking at what is still to do. And I have to confess, when I first became a trustee of RNIB, one of the things I kept thinking was, well, what's RNIB ever done for me? I was sort of in my mid to late 20s at the time. I didn't feel like it was relevant to me. I felt like the person that it was for was probably a man, probably in his 50s or 60s, definitely white. And, actually, there were some things that I thought needed to change. And rightly, when I put these views out there, the then chair said, well, there's only one way of changing that. So, come on board and be part of our future. So when I was reflecting on, what's RNIB ever done for me, I thought, apart from, of course, the tactile watch that I learnt to tell the time on, apart from the lorry loads of Braille books that arrived throughout school and university so that I could study alongside my peers, and apart from, tactile paving that means I can, in most cases, cross a road in safety. So there were things, I just hadn't really thought about them. But there is so much more to do. As part of our 150th celebrations last year, we did some research in terms of, what blind and partially sighted people felt were the greatest barriers. Well, only 1 in 4 of us is in work. And if you're totally blind, that's 1 in 10. There are some very outdated attitudes too, and those of us who have sight loss in the room, I'm sure, will have met these attitudes out and about every day. Most of the time not meant rudely, not intended to insult, but born of, ignorance or shyness or awkwardness or, oh my God, I don't want to say the wrong thing, so I won't say anything at all, so she'll just bump into me. All of those kinds of things every day. But lots of people, when questioned, the general public, they didn't think blind and partially sighted people could enjoy TV and films. Well, if you think about how long audio description's been around, and I can testify the number of box sets I've got through recently, they didn't think that we could read and enjoy reading. Well, I think we'd all disagree with that. But also, lots of people were very suspicious about having a blind or partially sighted boss. They weren't sure about that at all. Interestingly, they also said, though, they weren't sure blind or partially sighted people could be teachers or lawyers or MPs. So I haven't plucked up courage to tell David Blunkett about that yet. But there's clearly still some outdated attitudes and challenges for families, which is what I really wanted to focus on today. Part of what we've been doing over the past 18 months is taking a pretty hard look at ourselves at RNIB. So, you know, we've got some challenges. We had some serious financial challenges, which I'm glad to say we are getting through, but I don't think you can ever be complacent about these things, and you'll know yourselves. It's not easy being a charity in the 21st century. People are very squeezed. We've been looking at how to make sure our services are much more sort of UK-wide. So I think whilst there were brilliant things that we did in pockets, what we really want to do as a national organisation is be able to offer the same thing to people, whether they live in, you know, Portsmouth or Aberdeen. So our children and families work really focuses on bringing together and harnessing the voices of children and families. It's interesting, the previous speaker talked about, you know, you only ever know your own experience, and I think that's dead right. You know, the experience each of us has is so different, and we can't, you know, we've got to be careful about making assumptions about conditions, about, you know, one of the ones we get a lot is, oh, old people don't go online, they're frightened of the internet. Many older people feel very intimidated by the internet. I also know a lot of the over 80s who are on Skype, who haven't used computers in their working lives, but who absolutely, with kind of tablets and iPads, they really are getting into IT. So we've got to be, you know, careful of our own assumptions, I think. We're focusing on improving and protecting services which are, after all, statutory. Blind and partially sighted children have the same right to education and inclusion in the UK as sighted children. But at the moment, what we know is for the 34,000 children and young people who are blind or partially sighted, for many of them that's not a reality. So we know that families are struggling to get the support they need. And about 18 months ago, we sort of coordinated a group called the Young Vision Alliance, which was organisations, but also families, to take a proper snapshot look at what the situation is. So we found, this is a bit depressing, just to warn you, 1 in 3 local authorities have reduced spending on young people with visual impairments, and that meant 700 children were receiving less support than they had previously. A third of local authorities had seen a decrease in the number of QTVIs, and the QTVIs we did talk to were experiencing huge caseloads. And of course, the people who really suffer because of that are young people, because they're not getting the attention and support that they need. And only a quarter of young people said they didn't have a problem accessing exams. Well, rightly or wrongly, our society puts a great deal of store on exams and tests and how well you've done. If you can't access it, you can't, it's not a level playing field. Of young people who are sort of older than 16, 38% are NEET, so not in education, employment or training. That's double the average for the general public. So you'll be unsurprised that our recommendations focused on proper support and plans so that every young person has a plan and a commitment for what will be done to support them so that they can thrive. You know, this isn't about getting by. This isn't about, you know, running to catch up. This is about thriving, about having, you know, in a society where, like I outlined, you know, we still face barriers, we still face attitudinal issues. I think it's our responsibility to give young people an even better chance of success. So that includes accessible exams and all of those things. So we've been campaigning on those issues, and that's one element of how I think RNIB can help in this regard around families. A couple of other things. We, like I say, we've been looking at our service offer and really looking at how we make it, awful word, but universal, so that everybody has access to the same thing across the UK. So our sight loss advice, which is primarily digital and phone, you know, takes 500 calls a month from families, from teachers, all sorts of people. That's available across the UK. And of course our website, which has some downloads both for parents on things like, you know, money and so on, because it's not just, you know, when you have a child with sight loss, it's not just the issue specifically around their sight loss, it's all the other things that kind of come up too. So the extra financial support you might need, all of those things. And also advice for young people, making those difficult transitions from school to college and all of those things. This year we're running 22 shape and share events across the UK, which will be shaped locally depending on what local families want, and really are focused on looking at what support people are getting, engaging with people so that we can really understand what the experience is actually like out there. it's all very well having reports and research, but I think sometimes the most valuable thing is hearing people's stories. The third thing is we're developing a national network of and for younger people. So we had quite a successful go at this in Scotland, actually, some years ago. They're called Haggai, their network in Scotland. And it's an amazing, it's been an amazing sort of way for young people to support one another, and loads of fantastic outcomes have come through that. So want to make that a thing for children right across the UK. And Parents Facebook group, which currently has 600 members. We love loads more members, again, just so that people have, can share experiences, but also so that we can amplify those experiences, I suppose, when we talk to government and so on. Because if we don't know, I don't want us to be getting the messages wrong. And we're looking at the system, so working with Ofqual, for example, on access to exams, which is a real passion of mine, because we are, like I say, as a society, quite obsessed by exams. And I've got some pretty painful memories of some of the things that happened in my exams. And they, this is some years ago now, but they stay with you. It felt, there was a particularly difficult one at the end of my degree. I'd worked for 3 years. The only thing I was going to be assessed on was these exams in this 2-week period, and they were all messed up. Wrong braille papers, crashing computers. And it was, to be honest, it was a really difficult experience, and it took me a long time to kind of come to terms with the fact that I felt almost sort of cheated out of, how well I'd done. It wouldn't have mattered, it wasn't really the point. It was that I felt I wasn't given a fair chance. And so, that stuff stays with you for life. So I think we really have to fix it. And finally, of course, there's all our wider services. So our library service. So we have, I think, 56,000 users of our Talking Book service at the moment, and our Bookshare service, which is aimed at schools and colleges, which is really about giving young people access to accessible curriculum material. It's not all work, though, so toys and games and fun also should be part of this, I think, because we want our young people to be rounded individuals, not just people who are good at taking exams or good at being good. But also services, of course, like counselling, our transcription services, and our music advisory service too. So I just wanted to give you a flavour, I suppose, of where RNIB is. We've come a long way, 150 years. Dr. Thomas Armitage, when he founded RNIB, he was convinced that access to education and employment was the key for equality for blind and partially sighted people. And I'm not sure I'd say anything different today. But obviously the way we respond to that has to change, and it has to evolve. One of the things I really want to see is us working much, much more closely with organisations like BBS UK, because we all add value in our different ways, and we have a responsibility to really improve access and services for young people so that we can thrive. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask? There's one lady's waiting for the mic.
Yes, yeah, for sure.
Hi, it's more of a comment than a question. We've used the RNIB Legal Rights Advice Service on a couple of occasions.
Yeah.
Found it absolutely excellent and really good at getting the help and the advice that was needed for our daughter.
Thank you very much. Well, that's good to hear, because like all organisations, we find ourselves kind of stretched sometimes. So it's really helpful to know what's really useful when we're making decisions about where to invest. So thank you very much.
Anyone else? No? Okay, thank
all right.
you.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you.